Nunavut have always found ways to live in some of the toughest conditions anywhere. There's a resilience here that is hard to put into words. But the challenges facing Nunavut's communities are real. And one challenge sits at the center: housing. I'm Hannah Thibedeau, and in this episode of The Arctic Edge, we look at what's being done, the strategies, the partnerships, and the people working to build better, one home at a time. Cecil Lyell is the minister responsible for the Nunavut Housing Corporation. She spent most of her career working around housing and homelessness across Inuit lands. She knows the issues, and she doesn't shy away from describing it honestly.
It's hard to have a secure Arctic without a secure population. There are a lot of nuances around housing, especially within Nunavut. A majority of our housing stock are overcrowded homes. So we see instances of families of 10 living in a 2-bedroom household where there's not enough room for individuals, for students to have that quiet space to study, for parents to be able to rest after participating in the wage economy.
That picture, 10 people in a 2-bedroom home, isn't unusual. It's a part of daily life for too many families across Nunavut.
When the housing is so overcrowded, sometimes there's not enough space within them for everyone to have their own bed. So we hear of instances where family members need to wait until a bed is free for them to sleep.
We heard something similar from Albert Netzer, co-CEO of Arctic Fresh Group in Rankin Inlet. Albert spent years as Dean of Trades and Technology at Nunavut Arctic College, and he's seen the effects of this crisis firsthand.
I had a student, the man just kept falling asleep during classroom hours, and I was like, man, you got to stay up during class here. What's going on? And he said, you know what, I would stay up, but last night was not my turn to sleep on the bed. That's the reality of Nunavut. It's not his turn to sleep on the bed. A 2-bedroom with 13 people in there.
The shortage really affects every aspect of our life, where if you're a 16-year-old high school student, you might be going in to write your exams the next day, but because you weren't able to have a good night's rest, you weren't able to study, and then you're hoping to come in and maybe attend post-secondary where you're already having these effects in your high school marks because of your living situation. It carries on throughout your life. So without addressing the needs of housing at that young age, we're seeing the effects that the housing situation has through your whole life.
Shelter, sleep, mental and physical health, education. These aren't separate problems. They all come back to one thing, and the numbers behind it are staggering.
So right now in Nunavut, our wait list is approximately 3,700 applications on the public housing program. That's not 3,700 individuals, that's 3,700 families. In some of our communities, that wait list is almost half the size of our housing stock within that community.
Alex Cook is the founder of ArcTech, a modular housing developer based in Baker Lake. He had his own experience with public housing in the past.
For myself, growing up in public housing, that it just was not optimal. It's smaller housing. It's not a great place to live. Oftentimes, services are lackluster. And I just remember, moving to the south for the first time and just kind of really understanding how wide that gap really is, that very wide margin. A lot of the older units especially are really poorly built. So you've got drafts coming in through windows and doors. The buildings themselves are just cold. A lot of the buildings are diesel fired. So, sometimes you're dealing with diesel fumes. Mold, of course, being a really big issue. There's so many issues. It's unfortunate, just houses that were not really built for the Arctic.
So when Alex had the resources, he decided to build his own home. But what he found out shocked him.
We arrived at just one that was nothing spectacular, just like a little, 1,350 square foot building. Some of the quotes we got back were just absolutely outrageous. They're like between $1.1, $1.3 million, which is just crazy to think of. And of course, at that level, that's just not sustainable. I mean, even in the position I was in within our government, I would have been house poor, which is frankly crazy to think. Anyways, it got me thinking, if this is a situation that I'm dealing with, this is a situation that's got to be playing out time and time and time again. And so it started to make a lot more sense to me once I started getting into the space, why we don't see a lot of private home ownership. And the reason really is just because the costs are so astronomical. And so when we went into this business, we went in with three pillars, and I'll never walk away from these three pillars. It's affordability, efficiency, and resiliency. And I think we've been largely successful with where we are now, considering we're building the territory's first net zero home, which is huge. And it's at a price that's comparable with the market as a first build. That's not bad. We're scaling now, and obviously we're building our modular housing factory. So we're expecting prices to come way down with volume, and we're starting to see that. So I'm excited for that.
That's no small feat, because building in Nunavut isn't like building anywhere else in Canada.
For one, we don't have any trees. So we're importing almost 100% of what we need to build housing into the territory. And the way it moves up here is through our annual sea lifts. So a majority of our communities, they have one ship a year, some of them 2 or 3 a year, that transport all of the goods that community might need to consume in that year. So all of our building material comes in on that sea lift. So there's a lot of planning that goes into the front end. Normally in southern Canada, a construction company might acquire land and say, I'm going to build here. And they're able to do that quite quickly. Whereas in Nunavut, it's normally over a year process before you're actually able to start constructing.
And housing isn't just about the home itself. It's about everything that has to work around it.
All of our communities rely on diesel-generated power. And a majority of our generation power plants are almost at capacity or past capacity. So when we're constructing more housing, we need to look at how we're providing power to those homes. And we also need to look at the community infrastructure, where our water and grey water is delivered from our homes via trucked systems. So do we have adequate trucks within our community to deliver water? Do we have adequate garage spaces for those trucks? Because they can't sit outside in minus 50, or it'll be an icicle by the next morning. So it's really looking at all the needs along the way. When we deliver a house in Nunavut, we can't just be looking at that house as a single entity. We need to look at the surrounding infrastructure around it as well.
And it's also about what kind of housing people actually need.
When we talk about design, we have to be cognizant of the cultural dissimilarity of Northern Canada from Southern Canada and celebrate that and really just lean into it. So the way that Inuit in general use housing as opposed to Southern Canadians using housing is that we're very utilitarian. And so the house is not just a dwelling, it's also a tool. In the North, open concept is not just open concept, it's also a workspace. A floor that might be considered a floor in the South is actually a gigantic work surface where, a family or extended family members will come and they'll process meat, or they'll have gatherings, or there's so many different use cases. We're a very communal group of people. And so that's no different in my company. So when we design our houses, we engage with the community and various levels of the community. So we talk to different stakeholder groups. So we'll talk to hunters and trappers, or elders or youth, or families, or different kind of stakeholder groups, just to really understand what is it that what is their expectation for a built environment, right? So what is their usage case?
Historically, we've been able to deliver approximately 100 new housing units as a whole across the 25 communities, where this was not addressing our population increase. We were always playing a game of catch up. And then with Igluleo Kajarinyaq, or the Nunavut 3000 strategy, we're looking at really filling in those gaps within the housing continuum. So we're not just focused on the public housing program. We're addressing the needs for supports for homeowners. We're looking at the needs of the individual communities for supportive housing. So the shelters, domestic violence shelters. And we're also looking at the need for more affordable rentals. And now, for the first time in our history as a territory, we're a very young territory, but for the first time, we're building in every single Nunavut community at one time.
And the strategy isn't just about government doing more. It's about doing it differently with new partners.
The recent agreement that we signed with Build Canada Homes, in terms of seeing federal dollars flowing to the Nunavut Housing Corporation, as well as Inuit organizations in Nunavut, that is an exciting development and something that has been worked towards for years. And so that's a really, I think, great example of what we can do working with partners. And it's also a way that we can work to innovate. If we can see more Inuit actually working in manufacturing the modular houses. So we have our first modular housing factory under construction right now in the territory. It's in my home community of Alpha. It's extremely exciting to see that. We need more manufacturing right across the territory. It's part of the way how we're going to improve people's lives.
In addition to the factory in Arviat, the doors open for Inuit-owned private businesses like Arctech.
Our factory is actually already in Baker Lake, so the kit of parts to build the factory is already here. Our civil work is largely complete. We have about probably 6 or 7 days more of civil work that we have to do when everything thaws out. After that, we're basically laying a concrete pad, building the structure itself, and then commissioning the structure and beginning production. And so we are already lining up contracts now for multiple years. And from that point, we'll be producing houses locally.
And there are companies outside the traditional housing sector getting involved.
It's very exciting to see a lot of other companies that historically don't really come into the housing sector, like Agnico Eagle, where they're coming in and they're donating the shipping, because again, everything in Nunavut needs to be shipped up. So we saw with Agnico Eagle, they donated the shipping for 20 modular units, 10 for Baker Lake and 10 for Rankin Inlet. And we see these partnerships being made in really addressing the needs of Nunavut and the needs within the housing sector, because at the end of the day, a lot of our population within those communities are not just Nunavut, they're also employees for Agnico Eagle. So it's really supporting that whole community in a way where it starts from housing, but that really affects their ability to come in and go to work and have that safe, like, family home set up as well. So it's really great to see how we're progressing, not just as a territorial government, but our relationships with the private sector as well.
And that ripple effect she's talking about, it doesn't stop there, because how you build matters just as much as what you build. Albert Netzer has been thinking about this for a long time. At Arctic Fresh, it's not just about the homes, it's about the people doing the work.
We're not just going in and say, let's build a 8-plex, we'll get all Southern workers in there. What we're actually doing is exactly the opposite. We're recruiting heavily in the local community that we are in, and we're recognizing people with their skill and ability and paying them accordingly, whether they have a certificate or not. Our locals that we hire if they don't have much experience, we create a pathway for them, and they shadow somebody with experience, and they grow that way. And when we do that, it brings a meaning, a purpose for them to get up and go to work. And they feel like their skill, their talent, their experience is being utilized. They're being valued at that rate. That brings in a high retention rate with our employees.
And this is something Minister Lyell keeps coming back to. Who's doing the work matters.
We're really looking at how we can expand trades and tradespersons within Nunavut and really include them within the construction of all our units. Because really at the end of the day, once we construct the unit, we still need individuals who will maintain them. If your furnace breaks down in the winter, we can't wait 3 days for someone to fly in to fix it. We need to have those people in the community who have the knowledge to fix that.
But it isn't that simple. And Albert Netzer has seen this firsthand. The work moves from place to place, and people can't always move with it.
We have more than capable people in our communities to be in construction, to be in the workforce. They just don't have the certification. You could only accumulate so many hours and so much experience in one construction site. There's not readily available mechanisms inside the contract to fly people from Rankin to Baker Lake to continue the apprenticeship program. With Arctic Fresh, that we're traveling our apprentices from our communities to wherever our work is. We're hoping to achieve 49 registered apprentices this year.
ArcTech is taking a similar approach. Its training program connects directly to both workforce and education.
We've just developed something called the Arctic program. And the Arctic program is an acronym for Applied Residential Construction Training for Inuit Communities. And in this program, we're going to be taking folks all the way down to Ottawa for 2 months straight, providing them full wraparound supports in terms of, accommodations, flights, PPE, uniforms. We're paying for the Airbnbs, we're paying for the transportation. We're in the city, and all of this stuff, wages as well, obviously. All of this stuff is it's about being intentional, right? So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're trying to make this a culture, right? So it's not about just these minor actions. It's about taking these actions and making them part of your everyday life, so that it becomes the culture. And so, trying to get back into the institutional side of things by from the get-go being very community oriented and employee oriented. Development oriented. We're going to bring our people up through the company, but also apply that same mentality across our community. So doing a lot of things like, building community buildings, going out of our way to try to find funding sources so that we can build, rec centers or new community halls or youth centers. Like, we have so many different plans in place, and they're each at various different stages, but it really does come back to community. And I think that that's something, and I'll just speak for Nunavut, but I think that that's something within the territory. No matter which community you go to, you will always find a very strong community focus. And I think it's just cultural, frankly, just the way that, we are as Inuit. It's about helping one another and I guess really just trying to uplift society.
And there is more progress. In early 2026, the federal government committed $250 million through the Build Canada Homes Act, on top of the $230 million from the government of Nunavut. Now, together, that's nearly $500 million.
Today's announcement is about more than just housing units. It's about ensuring that Nunavummiut can participate fully in social and economic life. It represents a measure of hope that people will have places to rest after long days, where children can study, and where families can plan a future.
As Cecil Lyell explains, this investment isn't just money going north.
A lot of the time, it's kind of seen as that handout for our territory. And it's not really recognized that when we see an investment of $250 million, like we saw with Build Canada Homes for housing in Nunavut, a majority of that funding will not remain in Nunavut. A lot of it is going to Southern Canadian companies to purchase the materials. A lot of it is going to a workforce that comes up to construct these units and then leaves back to their provinces. So it's really an investment in all of Canada. Through Build Canada Homes and different programs that the federal government is now offering, and really ensuring that these dollars are remaining within Canada.
It's an investment felt across the country, and it's building something strong in the north, which raises a larger question too.
Does this also feel like an opportunity to invest in Canada in the North sovereignty that isn't simply just defense spending as well?
Yeah, it's so important to ensure that we're looking at security and sovereignty through that lens of the individuals and the impacts that our population has had on Arctic security and sovereignty, and really bringing it back to not just looking at the defense infrastructure we might be putting into communities, but how that infrastructure can impact our communities as well. If it's updated marine infrastructure, that will help with our sea lifts. We might be able to bring in more modular units. So it's really that whole wraparound service where we can't have Arctic security without the security of the Arctic peoples.
What it really comes down to is people.
I'm just really excited to work both with the federal government and Inuit organizations, as well as the private sector companies, and really ensure that we're building plans that encompass every aspect of our communities, and really not just building housing. We're really building the foundation upon which our communities stand, where at the end of the day, if you don't have access to adequate housing, the impacts can be felt in all aspects of your life and continuing forward. So I'm really excited to see each individual new unit come up.
The goal is ambitious, and Minister Lyell knows it.
With our current plans, it's so important to really bring that back to the impacts that each individual new unit has. And if we don't hit the 3,000 mark, I think it'll be so important to really lay that groundwork.
And for Alex Cook, it comes back to this.
Even, thousands of years ago when we crossed the land bridge and we started living up here in snow, you don't survive in a snow house by accident. You don't feed your family by accident. Everything is about planning. It's about routing. It's about logistics. And so in that regard, when we talk about, switching to my company, for example, we talk about, planning, construction of materials and everything. Like, this is a natural extension for just how live their lives around intentionality. So, where I think people see a lot of undue hardship, like, oh my God, you have to really, you have to build so hard and you have to plan so hard just to be able to build a house. And like, yeah, but that's not just, that's everything. Indigenous people in general are super resilient people. We face a lot of upward challenges. It's from the loaf of bread you got at the store to the ATV you're using to go hunt a caribou with. Everything requires a great deal of effort to get here, and a construction company is no different. You can't survive in the Arctic without being intentional.
I'm Hannah Thibedeau. Thank you for joining us on The Arctic Edge, with voices from the North and beyond.